Hello students, so we would have seen each other for 4 hours today, but you are not here, so I'm going to record what we would have done, and I hope that you watch this recording. So we would have started with Learning Unit 2, which is on writing skills. By way of an introduction, legal professionals need to develop the relevant skills associated with writing in plain language if they are to produce good quality documents that are accessible to their clients. This is one of the reasons why lawyers are advised to also own and use a legal dictionary, especially given that many Latin words and phrases form part of the language used in the legal profession. So we have spoken about dictionaries before, and if you don't have a legal dictionary, it's strongly recommended that you get one, especially because law has a lot of Latin phrases in it, that the meaning of which aren't always so clear. And as you can see from that first paragraph, plain language is an important focus that we will be looking at in this unit. So in this learning unit, we will look at the impact of language in different versions of an act. We will explore various writing techniques that can be applied to ensure that legal language is understood correctly, and we will examine different types of formal communication in great detail. I think this is very good preparation for the upcoming parts of your portfolio of evidence. So the objectives for this unit, after you've finished it, you should be able to take notes while listening, but I do think a lot of you can do that already. You should be able to discuss the impact of language in different versions of an act. You should be able to apply appropriate techniques to ensure legal language is understood correctly. You should apply the appropriate type of formal business communication in both spoken and written format. You should be able to write a formal letter. You should be able to draft a legal memorandum, and you should be able to use grammatically correct language in legal communications. So if you're ever unsure of any of this, I recommend going through your English for Law Students textbook. It's got a lot of this information in it. So let's talk about plain English or plain language. We sort of use the terms interchangeably. I like this example here. So plain English is the difference between he was conveyed to his place of residence in an intoxicated condition and he was carried home drunk. So he was carried home drunk is a much simpler way of saying he was conveyed to his place of residence in an intoxicated condition. It uses fewer words and it's more likely to be understood than the previous sentence. So for a definition, plain English, is the writing and setting out of essential information in a way that gives a cooperative, motivated person a good chance of understanding it at first reading and in the same sense that the writer meant it to be understood. Okay, so plain English appeals to people who want to be able to understand, so that's a cooperative, motivated person, and it gives them a good chance of being able to understand the first time they read the text because it is so plain. So this information, the definition and the example come from Martin Cutts. He wrote a book called Plain English. It's either Plain English or, yes, the Oxford Guide to Plain English. And if you're very interested in plain English, I recommend that you read it. It's quite an entertaining read, but also very informative. Okay, so here's a summary of some strategies that you can use to simplify complex language. So you can find these strategies on page 185 and 186 of the English for Law Students textbook. So the first is to break up long, complicated sentences into shorter, simpler ones. So if you see a long sentence, see if you can make it shorter or break it up into several shorter sentences. The next strategy is to substitute difficult words with words that are easier to understand. So if you read a sentence and you're not 100% sure what a word means, look it up and see if you can apply a simpler word instead. And then the third strategy you can use is the elimination of redundancy. So redundancy is where you say the same thing twice or more than twice in different ways, but you're essentially repeating yourself using different words. So eliminate those repetitions and make sure you're saying the thing once only. This is what I would have liked you to practice. This is on page 184 of the English for Law Students textbook, and it's from the Librarian Constitution. So you're asked, how would you make the below text easier to understand? And then as a hint, are there sentences that can be broken up, tricky words that could be replaced, and redundancies that could be deleted? Yes, there are. So look for them and see how you can employ those strategies to make this easier to read. Then I would have asked you to work together to rewrite Article 28 of the Librarian Constitution in plain English. So this is on page 185 of the textbook. You can read through that and then again employ those strategies. So you're looking for long sentences that can be broken up, tricky words that could be replaced, and redundancies or repetitions that could be deleted. And then I would have liked you to compare these. So here we've got the original Article 27 on citizenship in the Librarian Constitution, and in the right-hand column we've got the official plain language version. So this was published as a plain language version of Article 27 on citizenship. So I would have asked you to compare the two briefly, and then answer the questions on the official plain language version. So do you think it is a successful attempt at simplifying the original text? Why? Are there instances where words are left out? Does this affect your understanding? And to quote an example of sexist language from this extract, so something that sort of prioritizes men in this case. So you can find this exercise on pages 186 to 187 of the textbook. I was then going to ask you to write an improved version of the plain version act on the right-hand side. So it's already in plain language, but I think it could be improved. So I wanted to see how you would have improved this. We would have done a little bit of language focus. So we would have looked at subject-verb agreement. And so subjects and verbs must always agree with one another in number, so singular or plural. So the rule is if a subject is singular, its verb must also be singular. And if a subject is plural, its verb must also be plural. So singular, if you think of one thing, then the verb should also just be by itself. And if a subject is plural, so that usually means you add an S, that means you add an S to the verb. There are, of course, exceptions to this. Then I would have given you this quick self-test in which you give me the correct option. I'll go through the answers with you now. So the correct answer here is B. The problem with all these cases is that they are tricky. So problem with all these cases. So cases is the subject here. So that is plural, so you have to use are, not is. And the reason you use is here next to cases is because problem is the first subject and that is singular. So the problem with all these cases is that they are tricky. Then for the next question, the correct option is B again. So the policies have been taken into consideration. So policies is plural, which means you use have and not has. So we use has if the subject is singular. So if it was one policy, you could say the policy has been taken into consideration, but this is plural, so it's the policies have been taken into consideration. Then the correct answer for this one is A. Crime rates increase has terrified investors, and this is correct because rate is singular. It's referring to the possessive here. So it's saying the increase that belongs to the crime rate has terrified investors. And B is wrong because it says have terrified investors. So that's implying that increase is plural when it's not, it's singular. So the increase has terrified investors. And then we would have begun with theme 2, which is on formal correspondence, and would have had a quick look at the cartoon that says, you don't call this a legal document, do you? I can understand every word of it, which I think is good commentary on what we have come to understand about legal documents, or what we have come to expect in terms of legal documents. So we expect to not be able to understand on a first reading, but it doesn't have to be that way. We would have discussed these questions. So what types of legal documents are you aware of? What most distinguishes a legal document from other texts? And in business, how formal do you think the writing needs to be in a legal memorandum, a written letter, an email, and why? I would have then asked you to go through these questions, which you can find on VC Learn under Learning Unit 2, Theme 2, Active Learning. So it's more information on the different kinds of writing or communication that you find in law, so memorandums, letters, emails, and very useful information on these links here. So do have a look at those links. I think it will assist you in upcoming POE parts as well. And then you can confirm your answers against the information in Unit 13 of the prescribed textbook. So go through Unit 13 in the English for Law Students book. I would have then gone through part 3 of your POE with you, which is due very, very soon. So as always, I'd like you to refer to the module outline, the program assessment schedule for the due date, and then obviously the portfolio of evidence document. So in the module outline on pages 10 and 13, you've got some tips for task 3 or part 3. It'll focus on reading and interpreting complex text like journal articles. So we're looking at journal articles now. It will cover Learning Unit 1, Theme 4. So you can go back in your notes or in your textbook to have a look at Learning Unit 1, Theme 4. Just give me a moment to shut my window because this dog is annoying. Okay, I'm back. Thank you for your patience. So preparation hints for all the assessments. These hints are applicable to whatever assessment you're doing for this module. Work through all of the activities on the Learn platform in preparation for your tasks. The skills acquired in each of these themes will help you produce and submit well-researched and reasoned tasks. So it's good practice, and because this is a phase-out module, we don't have time to go through absolutely everything in class, so it's important that you spend time going through the work on VC Learn yourselves. Use Learn as a workbook to progress through the material, and then ensure that you study from the textbook and any other prescribed material. Make sure that you have mastered the learning unit objectives in all relevant learning units. If you can confidently respond to all learning unit objectives, you should have no problem at all in passing your assessments. Okay, so theme 4 is on reading complex texts, and you can see that the prescribed material is units 4 and 5 of the textbook. So for part 3 of your POE, I recommend you go through units 4 and 5 in the textbook, and these are the learning outcomes on the screen. So this is what part 3 or task 3 of the POE looks like. It begins on page 5 of the POE document. It's for 30 marks. And as the heading says, it's on reading complex text. So you have to access a copy of the Decriminalization of Cannabis for Personal Use in South Africa document, and you can access it directly via the link in the document. So please do that, just to make sure that you've got the correct version of the text. Question number 1 asks you to identify any 4 words that you are unfamiliar with while you are reading the article, and to use a dictionary to find the definition of each word. Paraphrase the definition, so that means put the definition in your own words in your assignment, and remember to footnote the dictionary you used. So footnotes are crucial here, as well as the page number that you found the definition on. Provide a reference for the definition using the IIE legal referencing guidelines. So you've got a footnote, and hopefully you know by now that for every footnote you have, there should be a reference in your reference list, a sort of elongated version of the footnote. So have a look at the IIE legal referencing guidelines for that. If you make use of an electronic resource, remember to include the URL as well as the date of access in your footnote. So if you're using a hard copy dictionary, you'll include a page number. If you're using an online dictionary, include the URL as well as the date that you accessed that dictionary. Question 2 asks you to identify the 3 international drug conventions that relate to the regulations of narcotic and psychotropic substances, and indicate whether South Africa is a party to these treaties. So you can see this is for 4 marks. So it's telling you to identify 3 international drug conventions, so that's 3 out of 4 marks, and to indicate whether South Africa is a party to these treaties. So sort of the yes or no, but you have to write this in a full sentence, obviously, for 4 marks. And then just going back to the previous question, so you can see it's for 16 marks. You have to identify 4 words. So by choosing those 4 words from the article, it has to be from the article, you get 4 marks for doing that, and then you get marks for using a dictionary to find the definition and to paraphrase the definition, so put it into your own words, to include a footnote as well as a reference in your reference list. So it's for a lot of marks. Make sure you do this correctly. Then question number 3, the authors of the article seek to compare the legal position as set out in Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development and Others versus Prince and Others with the International Drug Conventions. Provide a summary of how the authors view the outcome of the Prince case against the International Drug Convention. So keywords here, summary. So summary is making it shorter. It's also putting it in your own words. And it's about how the authors view the outcome of the Prince case. So you're focusing on the Prince case, or the outcome of the Prince case against the International Drug Conventions, and specifically the author's view. This is for 6 marks. And just as a reminder, paraphrasing is where you put something into different words. Summarizing is a brief statement of the main points. So by finding the main ideas in a text as well as the most important supporting information, you not only put the ideas in your own words, you also shorten the text at the same time. So you paraphrase and you summarize at the same time. They work hand in hand. And as I put on the screen here, no quotes. So if you're asked to summarize something, I don't want to see any quotes. It's about putting it into your own words and making it shorter. Then question number 4 asks you to quote. So here I expect to see quotation marks. Quote any section from the article that references the Drugs and Drug Trafficking Act. So you've had to read this act for the previous 2 tasks or parts to the POE. So you might want to refer back to it, but also just read through the document and see where it refers to this act. Remember to correctly cite the article in a footnote according to the IIE legal referencing guidelines. So this is for 4 marks. You have to quote, so show me quotation marks, and a part where the articles that you're asked to focus on for this part references the Drugs and Drug Trafficking Act. So you're looking for some sort of reference. So it might be in text, it might be a reference, it might be a footnote, but it should ideally appear within the article. Then I've just reminded you of some law referencing guidelines on quotations. So direct quotes should be used sparingly. No more than 10% of the assignment may consist of direct quotes. So for this question, you've specifically been asked to quote, so you don't need to worry about percentages there. Quotes are indicated by the use of double quotation marks. They must be accurate, so all editing must be copied exactly as in the original source. and use single quotation marks for a quote within a quote. So if the source you are quoting has quoted someone else, you use single quotation marks to indicate that they're quoting someone else, but then the source that you are quoting is in double quotation marks. Quotations shorter than 3 lines are not indented. So if they are longer than 3 lines, which I don't think they will be for this question that we're talking about, but if they are longer than 3 lines, you usually indent them. So just look that up in the guidelines for a bit more information. Should words need to be removed from or added to the quotation to make it make sense as part of the sentence you're writing, changes need to appear in square brackets. So the example we've got here is, let's say the original quote, this is part of the sentence of the original quote. So the rule of law provides for, the quote should just read as follows. You can just change that lowercase t to a capital T, but because you've made that change, you put it in square brackets. So the reader knows this isn't what it looks like in the original text. So it's okay to make changes as long as it doesn't change the original author's intended meaning. Then once you have completed that task or part, you can submit under submission links. And I just ask that you spend some time on this. I know it's due very soon, but try not to do it the night of, because I think that makes a big difference in terms of the quality of what you're submitting. And quality is part of the mark allocation in a sense. So like if I can't understand what you're writing, you will lose marks. So just make sure what you're writing is clear and adheres to the minimum requirements and includes footnotes and a list of references. I then wanted to talk you through part 4 of your POE. So once again, refer to your module outline, your program assessment schedule, and the portfolio of evidence document. So task 4 focuses on plain language writing skills. So that's what we went through at the start of this lecture. You will be required to rewrite a complex text into plain language using the plain language guidelines. So remember those guidelines: shortening or breaking up sentences, replacing tricky words, and eliminating redundancies. It will cover Learning Unit 2, Theme 1. So if you have a look at Learning Unit 2, Theme 1, it's on plain legal language, and the associated prescribed material is Unit 10 of the textbook. So have a look at that for yourself, just to remind yourself of the different strategies. So task 4 is for 30 marks. It's on plain language writing, making sense of proposed legislation. So you have to obtain a copy of the Cannabis for Private Purposes Bill and answer the questions that follow. You can access the bill using this link. So please do use this link to access the bill, just to make sure you are accessing the correct version and the correct document. Take note of the following. This is useful information. Section 1 of the bill on page 3 sets out specific definitions. Section 7 of the bill on page 7 sets out the specific penalties for offences in the bill. And the objects of the bill are set out on page 19 of the bill. Under this heading on page 20, marked as item G, is a segment on prescribed quantity, trafficable quantity, and commercial quantity. So I don't want you to just skim over this information. This is useful because it basically gives you an outline of the whole document. So what it's telling you is you don't need to read absolutely every word of the document. You can sort of skip from section to section to find the information that is useful to you in answering the question. So it says here, keeping in mind the above parts of the bill, write a note in which you would advise a colleague who does not know the law in plain language about what each of the different quantities in the bill refers to and what the penalties are for contravening the provisions in the bill governing these quantities. So let's say someone you work with who isn't a lawyer. So perhaps they are the receptionist, perhaps they clean the office for you. They don't know too much about law, but you feel it's important for them to know about the quantities of marijuana that are allowed and penalties for contravening these provisions. So you're writing them a note, basically in plain language, letting them know what these different sections of the bill are, basically. Think about what should be achieved when trying to engage with the general public for comment on legislation that will directly impact on their rights. So in writing this note for a colleague who doesn't know much about the law, think about the general public. The general public also doesn't know much about the law. So how would you make this easier or more accessible for them to understand? There are great resources on the BC Learn platform that you can access on plain language writing. One of these is the Deribus article. So have a look at that article. It should assist you. And this is nice. For this task, you do not have to use footnotes. So no footnotes are required for this task because you're writing kind of informal note using plain language. I'd just like to mention here that plain language is also about the presentation of information. So the way it looks on the page. So it might be easier in some cases to make use of something like a table or a flow diagram or a flow chart to convey what you are trying to convey, basically. So it doesn't need to be all about words. If you can include a picture that conveys what you're trying to convey, then that's great. But I think for this question, you will have to include some words, but perhaps there's a different way you could go about doing it. Perhaps you could use a table or something like that. There is a rubric for this task that will not only assist you by indicating what is being assessed for this question, but what you need to do to succeed with answering the above mentioned question for this task. So rubrics are always useful. So it tells you what's being assessed, but also how you can make sure that your answer or submission is in line with what is required. So let's just have a look at the rubric. So it says, in order to be awarded full marks for these elements of task or part 4, you need to have discussed the different quantities in the bill and what the respective penalties are for contravening the rules governing these quantities. And you need to use the plain language guidelines. So here I've given you the 3 basic guidelines as they appear in the textbook, but you've got some more here, and please use them. Use short sentences, use headings to guide the reader through the document, focus on the easy dissemination of information, use bullets and lists where possible, use short paragraphs, remove unnecessary and repetitive words, use the active voice. So instead of the ball was thrown by the boy, you say the boy throws the ball. Use pronouns such as I, you, and we. So that's important. It makes the document seem like it's written for the person rather than the public at large. You refer to them as you, and you refer to yourself as me. Where possible, remove the use of jargon, technical terms, and Latin phrases. So we know law is rife with jargon, technical terms, and Latin. So where possible, remove it or replace it with something that is easier to understand. And then writing mechanics, use correct grammar, punctuation, and spelling throughout. So I've noticed with your previous submissions, because I think you did them in a hurry, you don't have time to edit your work. So please give yourself time. Do this in good time so that you can edit your work before you submit, so you can get rid of silly grammatical errors, spelling, punctuation, and so on. Okay, so that is for task 4. We've gone through task 3 and task 4, or part 3 and part 4 of the POE today. Part 3 is obviously due very soon, part 4 a little bit later, but get started on it as soon as possible. And if you have any questions, please do feel free to email me.